The woman who walked through the dust toward the Barlow Ranch on that October morning in 1882 looked like something the desert had chewed up and refused to swallow. And Owen Barlow, standing at his crooked gate with a coffee cup in one hand and a fencing nail in the other, could not bring himself to turn her away. She came from the direction of the old Caldwell Road, which was itself a bad sign, because nothing good had come down that road in the better part of 3 years. The morning light was low and amber, cutting sideways across the flat Texas scrubland, and it caught the gray smear on her dress and her forearms, and it caught the dark circles beneath her eyes, and it caught the way she walked, not stumbling, not frantic, but with the careful measured pace of someone who had learned that the ground could not be trusted. She was carrying a small canvas bag over one shoulder. She was wearing a gray dress that had once been blue. And she was covered, from the hem of that dress to the line of her jaw, in a fine pale ash, like she had walked through the remains of something that had burned before she reached it. Owen set the fencing nail on the post and watched her come. He was 31 years old. He had been running the Barlow Ranch alone for 2 years, which was long enough for the fences to start falling and the barn roof to start complaining and the well rope to start fraying. Long enough for the neighboring ranchers, the Hesslers and the Maginties and old Reverend Polk, who kept a cattle operation on the side, to start calling his spread the worst ranch in 3 counties. He was not offended by the description. It was accurate. He had inherited the place after his father died and his older brother Clem rode west and never wrote back, and he had been fighting it into something resembling a working operation ever since, mostly losing. But he was a man who opened his gate. That was the thing people said about Owen Barlow, the one thing they said that was not a complaint. The Barlows always opened the gate. His father had been the same way. His grandmother, who had crossed from Tennessee before the war, had apparently fed half a county during a drought year without being asked. It was just something the family did. So when the woman reached the gate, his crooked, half-hinged gate with one of the crossbars hanging loose, he lifted the latch and swung it open, and he said, "You need water." She stopped. She looked at him with brown eyes that were darker and more careful than any eyes he had seen in a long time, and she said, "I need more than water, but water first if you have it." He had it. She drank 2 full cups at the pump beside the barn, washing her hands in between, watching the gray water run off her skin and sink into the dirt. He stood back a respectful distance and gave her the space to drink without being stared at, though he did look at her once, quickly, and noted that she was probably in her mid-20s, and that the ash was not just on her clothes but in her hair, and that her boots were good boots, better than her dress, which meant either she had dressed herself from 2 different lives or the dress had come later under worse circumstances. When she straightened up and dried her hands on the one clean part of her sleeve, she turned and faced him fully. "My name is Charlotte Dugan," she said. "I don't expect that to mean anything to you." She was right. It didn't. He said, "Owen Barlow, this is my ranch." He paused. "Such as it is." She looked past him at the listing barn and the patchy pasture and the house with the porch step that had been missing for a year and said, "I've seen worse." He wasn't sure she had, but he appreciated the kindness. He brought her inside and fed her what he had, which was cold cornbread from the previous night and salt pork and coffee that was a week past its best. She ate all of it. She sat at his kitchen table with the ash still on her arms, and she ate with the focused gratitude of someone who had not eaten since the day before. And she did not speak while she ate, and he did not push her. There were 2 things a person needed before they could talk honestly about anything, and they were food and water, and now she had both. When she was done, she folded her hands on the table and looked at him and said, "My husband's ranch burned 2 nights ago. Everything burned. He was in it." Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said. It wasn't cruel the way she said it. It was just accurate, the way the worst ranch in 3 counties was accurate. He was not a good man. "I am not grieving him." But the ranch was in his name, and there was nothing in my name except what I carry in that bag, and his family is in Abilene. And if I go to Abilene, they will call me a murderer because they've been waiting for a reason to, and now they have one." "Did you murder him?" Owen asked. "No," she said. "The fire started in the hayloft. Lightning 3 nights back. He was drunk and couldn't get himself out." He believed her. He couldn't have said exactly why, except that her eyes were not the eyes of someone who was lying. They were too tired to be lying. Lying required a certain kind of energy, and she had none to spare. "So you walked," he said. "I walked," she said. 2 days. I found a creek and slept near it the first night. I followed the Caldwell Road because I knew there were ranches along it. The Hessler place is closer, 8 miles back." "I know," she looked at him steadily. "I passed it. The Hesslers knew my husband. His family and their family did business together." That explained it. It explained why she had walked 8 extra miles in the direction of the worst ranch in 3 counties, wearing ash and carrying a name he didn't recognize, hoping for someone who didn't already have a reason to send her away. Owen leaned back in his chair and looked at the cracked plaster of his kitchen ceiling. Charlotte Dugan. No, it didn't ring any bells. And that was the good part of being nobody's particular friend out here. He had no particular enemies either, and no old obligations to her dead husband's family. "I've got a small room," he said. "It was my mother's sewing room. There's a cot in it and a window. It's not much." "It doesn't need to be much," she said. "And I could use help," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise. The ranch is falling apart. I can pay a little, not much, but meals and the room and a little toward whatever you decide to do next." She looked at him for a long moment, reading him the way people read strangers when their lives depended on getting it right. "You're not married?" she asked. "No," he said. "Why not?" It was a direct question, and he felt the edge of it. He said, "I've been too busy failing at ranching." The corner of her mouth moved. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the beginning of something. "All right, Owen Barlow," she said. "I'll take the room and the work, and when things settle, I'll figure out what comes next." He showed her the sewing room and brought a clean towel and told her the pump was hers to use whenever she needed. She thanked him without fuss, without excessive gratitude, which he found refreshing. She was not a woman who performed her need for anyone. She stated it plainly and accepted the help plainly, and that was a kind of dignity he recognized. That first week was strange in the way that all new arrangements are strange. Charlotte woke early before him. He would come out of his bedroom in the gray pre-dawn and find the fire already started in the stove and the coffee already on. And it startled him every morning because he had been waking alone for 2 years, and the evidence of another person's presence. A used cup, a moved chair, smoke coming from the chimney, had the quality of a small repeated miracle. She had cleaned the ash off herself that first night, scrubbing at the pump until the water ran clear, and in the plain daylight of the following days he could see her properly. She was a woman of medium height with strong hands and dark hair that she wore pinned back severely, and brown eyes with a particular quality of attention in them, like she was always measuring distances. Not physical distances, but the distances between what people said and what they meant. She was 26 years old, she told him. She had grown up in Kansas, which was how she knew ranches, how she knew the mechanics of the thing, the seasonal rhythms and the daily labor of it. She had married Thomas Dugan at 22 because her father had said it was a good match, and she had not yet learned to trust her own judgment over her father's. Thomas had brought her to Texas, to his family's land grant near the town of Harlan, and in 4 years of marriage she had come to understand that her own judgment had been correct and her father's had been very wrong. She did not give Owen all of this at once. She gave it in pieces, one piece at a time, over the course of mornings when they worked side by side and evenings when they sat on what remained of his porch and watched the darkness come in from the flat horizon. He gave her pieces, too, in the same slow way. He told her about his father, a man named Owen Barlow who had built this ranch from a quarter section, and a determination that his sons would not be poor. Hiram had succeeded at the ranch and failed at the determination. Clem had run the moment he was old enough, and Owen had stayed, not out of obligation exactly, but out of something closer to stubbornness, a refusal to let the land be wasted. He was a good man, Owen said one evening, talking about his father. But he was not good at saying things directly. He showed things. You knew what mattered to him by watching what he tended. Charlotte was sitting on the top porch step, the remaining step, the second one from the bottom, with her knees drawn up and her arms around them, and she said, "What did he tend?" "The fence line," Owen said. "He was obsessive about it. Even when the cattle were thin and the house needed painting, the fences were always right. He used to say a fence that keeps your cattle in also keeps the wrong things out." "Is that why the fences are falling now?" she asked, not unkindly, curiously. He laughed, which surprised him because he had not been laughing much. "Yes," he said. "I think I've been proving some kind of point without meaning to." She nodded, and her expression said she understood that particular brand of accidental defiance, and he thought she probably understood it from her own experience. On the 5th day, she went to work on the south fence. He had not asked her to. He had been planning to do it himself, getting to it the way he got to everything on the ranch, which was eventually and imperfectly. He went out after breakfast to find her already stringing wire, working methodically between posts, her hair wrapped in a cloth against the dust, her sleeves rolled to the elbow. He stood watching her for a moment and felt something shift in him that he could not name right away. It was something about the way she worked, not performing, not trying to impress him, just doing the thing because the thing needed doing. He had been alone on this ranch for 2 years, and for 2 years he had done everything alone, and the loneliness of it had settled so deep into him that he had almost stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing a persistent ache. And now here was this woman, working on his fence without being asked, and the loneliness kicked back to life just to show him it had been there all along. He went and got his own tools and worked beside her without saying anything about it. By noon, they had restrung 40 yards of fence and replaced 3 posts. It was a better morning's work than Owen had managed alone in months. They ate lunch sitting in the narrow stripe of shade along the barn wall, drinking water and eating the biscuits she had made that morning, and she said, "Your east pasture needs attention too. The grass is overgrazed near the water hole." "I know," he said. "I've only got 12 head right now. I used to rotate them, but it's harder alone. If we move them every 3 days between the east and west pastures, the grass will recover." "How do you know cattle?" "I paid attention on my husband's ranch," she said. "It was the only part of the life there that I didn't hate." She said it without bitterness, which made it more real somehow. "His family will be looking for you," Owen said. It was something he had been thinking about all week, not with alarm but with practical concern, the way you think about weather that might be coming. "Probably," she said. "Thomas had a brother, Franklin. He was always worse than Thomas." She looked out at the pasture. "Franklin will want the land grant, whatever's left of it after the fire, and he'll want to make sure I don't have any claim to it, which I don't legally because Thomas made sure nothing was in my name. So his best approach is to accuse me of causing the fire. And what will he say you did it for?" "Revenge," she said, "which is half right. I had reason, I just didn't do it." Owen thought about this. He said, "If someone comes here asking questions, I'll be gone before they find me," she said. "That's not what I was going to say," he said. She turned and looked at him. "I was going to say, if someone comes here asking questions, I'll tell them the truth. You arrived here 3 days after the fire, walking from the west, which means you were walking away from Harlan, not hiding in it. Lightning was reported over the Harlan area 3 nights ago. Old Pete Cassidy at the feed store mentioned it when I was in town Tuesday. And you had the ash on you because you were there when it happened, not because you said it." Her expression was complex. It moved through several things quickly. "You went to town Tuesday," she said. "You gathered information." "I bought feed," he said, "and I paid attention to what people were saying." She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said very quietly, "Thank you." The word was simple, but the weight behind it was not. It had the weight of someone who had not been defended in a very long time. In the weeks that followed, the ranch began to change. It was not a dramatic change. It was the slow, incremental kind, the kind that comes from two people working steadily at something day after day. The south fence got finished. The east pasture got rotation. The well rope got replaced with rope Owen bought in town, while Charlotte made a list of exactly what they needed, organized by priority. And it was the most useful list he had ever seen, because he had been making his own mental lists for 2 years and they had always been slightly wrong. She found that one of his heifers had pink eye and treated it with the remedy she knew, a warm salt wash twice a day, and the eye cleared in a week. She told him the barn roof needed more than patching, that 3 of the rafters were soft and would not hold another winter, and she was right about that too. He bought lumber when he could afford it, and she helped him haul it, and she climbed up to the barn roof with a kind of fearlessness that made him nervous and amused at the same time, and they reboarded the worst sections while the October sun heated the roof to something uncomfortable. "You're not afraid of heights," he said from the ladder below her. "No," she said, driving a nail with efficient competence. "What are you afraid of?" She paused, and he thought she might not answer, but she said, "Staying somewhere that's slowly killing me and not noticing soon enough." He thought about that. He thought about Thomas Dugan, a man he had never met, and about 4 years of a woman noticing herself disappearing. He said, "How long before you noticed?" "About 8 months," she said, "but knowing and leaving are different problems." "What made you leave in the end?" She drove another nail. "He raised his hand to me twice. I told him if there was a third time I would not be there for it. He didn't believe me. There was a third time." She looked down at him from the roof, her face in the shadow of her hat brim. "I had my bag packed before he was awake the next morning. That was 2 weeks before the fire. I was going to walk to the Caldwell Road and find work somewhere." "But you stayed." "He found the bag," she said. "He was angry, and then he was sorry the way he always was. And I stayed because I was afraid and because I told myself it would be different." She looked back at the roof. "It wasn't different, it was lightning." She said it like a closed door, like a thing that was finished and filed and not to be reopened. He let it be closed. But he thought about it that night, lying in his own bed listening to the wind come across the flats. He thought about the specific courage of someone who had stayed somewhere terrible for long enough to stop knowing it was terrible, and then had walked 2 days through the Texas scrub with ash on her dress and her husband's name on her back like a brand she hadn't asked for, and had knocked on the gate of the worst ranch in 3 counties and asked for water. He thought it was one of the bravest things he had ever heard of. He also thought, lying there in the dark, that Charlotte Dugan was one of the most interesting people who had ever been in his life, and that he had been aware of this for weeks and had not known what to do with the awareness. The next morning she was at the stove when he came out, and she was humming something under her breath, very softly, barely audible, just a thread of melody. She stopped when she heard him, and she did not seem aware that she had been doing it at all. He thought, "I could love her." He did not say this. He had sense enough not to say this. She was 2 weeks out of a terrible marriage and freshly widowed from a man who had been more prison than husband, and the last thing she needed was the man who had opened his gate looking at her with something other than neighborly goodwill. But he thought it. The telegram arrived on a Monday, brought out from town by the boy who ran messages for the telegraph office, a 12-year-old named Dewey who made the 8-mile ride for 2 cents a message and was generally reliable. Owen read it standing in the yard. Charlotte came out to the porch and watched him read it, and she could see from the way his jaw set that it was not a telegram anyone would want. He brought it over and handed it to her without comment. It was from Franklin Dugan. It was addressed to the Barlow Ranch, which meant Franklin had been asking around town and someone had talked, which was not surprising because someone always talked. It said, "Charlotte Dugan is wanted for questioning regarding the death of Thomas Dugan and the destruction of property. Anyone harboring her is subject to the same inquiry. Reply expected within 3 days." Charlotte read it twice and then handed it back. Her face was very still in the way that a person's face gets still when they are controlling something that wants to be otherwise. "He doesn't have legal authority," Owen said. "That's not a sheriff's telegram. That's a private citizen's telegram." "Franklin has money," she said. "Money buys the appearance of authority. Money doesn't buy what actually happened." She looked at him. "Owen, you know that's not true." He wanted to argue, but he couldn't because she was right. It was 1882 in West Texas, and money bought a great deal of what actually happened, and a widow with no property and a name nobody in the county could verify was not in a strong position. "Then we'll get you in a strong position," he said. "What does that mean?" "It means we go to town. Tomorrow. We talk to Sheriff Meadows, who is a fair man, before Franklin Dugan's money gets there first. You tell him the truth. About the lightning, about walking here, about everything, and I'll back it up." She stared at him. "You do that." "Charlotte." He said her name, and the directness of it surprised them both. "I have told you twice now what I'm willing to do. You don't need to be surprised each time." Something moved in her face. Something cracked very slightly in the careful arrangement of it. She said, "All right, tomorrow." They went to town on Tuesday in Owen's wagon, the one with the squeaking wheel he had been meaning to fix for 3 months, and Charlotte sat on the bench beside him in her cleaned gray dress, which was not beautiful but was respectable, and she had pinned her hair carefully, and she sat very straight. Harlan County's main town was called Meridian, which was a grand name for a town with 2 saloons, a general store, a telegraph office, a small church, a boarding house, and a sheriff's office that had seen better days. Owen had been coming here for supplies his whole life. He knew most people by name, and most people knew him, which was an advantage. Sheriff Cal Meadows was 60 years old and had been in Meridian since before Owen was born, and had a reputation for being hard to bribe and easy to read. He was not a warm man, but he was a just one, which was rarer and more valuable. He was in his office when they arrived, and he shook Owen's hand and looked at Charlotte with the measuring look of a man who had heard her name somewhere recently. "Charlotte Dugan," he said. "Yes," she said. "I expect you've had a telegram." 2 days ago," Meadows said. "From a Franklin Dugan out of Abilene, says you're wanted for questioning." "I'm here to answer questions," she said. "Ask them." He did ask them. He was thorough and not unfriendly, and Charlotte answered everything without flinching. The details were consistent and specific: the lightning storm on the night of October 4th, the fire starting in the hayloft, the fact that the hayloft was the highest point on the property and the most exposed to a strike, Thomas's condition when the fire started, why she had not gone to the nearest neighbor, how long she had walked and along which road. Meadows wrote everything down. Then he looked at Owen. "And you?" Owen told him about Charlotte's arrival, the ash, the condition she was in, the direction she had come from. He mentioned Pete Cassidy's comment about the lightning. He said he had no reason to doubt her account and considerable practical reason to believe it. Meadows looked at his notes. He looked at Charlotte. "The Hessler family mentioned a woman matching your description past their gate without stopping," he said. "If you had set that fire and were fleeing, you'd have stopped somewhere you knew people." "That's correct," Charlotte said. "And the Hesslers know the Dugan family." "Yes." Meadows nodded slowly. "I'm going to write to the sheriff in Harlan County, have him look at the site formally. And I'm going to write back to Franklin Dugan that he needs to come here with something more than a telegram if he wants to make accusations." He looked at Charlotte steadily. "You're not under any charge from me," he said, "but don't go far. If the Harlan County Sheriff needs a statement, I'll need to find you." "She's at the Barlow Ranch," Owen said. "She'll stay findable." Meadows gave him a look that was not quite a smile and not quite something else. "Good enough," he said. They were back in the wagon by noon. The squeaking wheel sang all the way out of town, and Charlotte sat with her hands folded in her lap looking straight at the road ahead. About 3 miles out, she said, "Thank you, again." "Stop thanking me," he said. "We're partners." She turned and looked at him. The word landed between them. "Partners," she repeated. "In the ranch," he said quickly. "I know what you meant," she said, but she was looking back at the road, and he could see the small movement of a smile at the corner of her mouth, and he decided not to say anything else about it because he had embarrassed himself enough for one Tuesday. November came in cold and clear. The ranch had improved visibly enough that one of the Hessler boys, riding past on an errand, slowed down to look at the newly strung fence line and the reboarded barn, and Owen happened to be in the yard and exchanged a brief nod with the boy, who rode on without comment. Charlotte had taken over the kitchen entirely, which Owen was not complaining about. She was a considerable cook, practical and efficient, making the most of what they had, and she had found wild onions along the creek bed and dried herbs in the field behind the barn that she knew the names of and he didn't, and the meals got substantially better. She was also ordering the root cellar, which had been in a state of chaos since his mother's time, a jumble of jars and rotting vegetables and old implements that belonged nowhere. One afternoon he went down to bring up a jar of last summer's tomatoes and found everything sorted, the jars labeled and grouped, the usable implements separated from the broken ones, and the general sense that someone had applied intelligence to a problem instead of just letting it fester. He stood at the bottom of the cellar stairs and said, "You didn't have to do this." She came down behind him with 2 more jars and said, "I know, I find it satisfying. Ordering things. Seeing a place treated as if it matters," she said. She set the jars in their place. Thomas's ranch was never this way. He didn't care about the actual function of things. He cared about the appearance. Owen looked at the neat shelves. "Is that why you're so practical?" "That and Kansas," she said. "Kansas makes you practical or it kills you." He laughed, and she laughed too, and it was the first time he had heard her full laugh, not just the careful half-smile but an actual laugh, and it was a warm and unguarded sound, and he had the very specific feeling of watching a person remember that they were allowed to do that. The evenings were his favorite part of the day, though he had not admitted this to himself until November, when the days got short enough that they were inside by 5 o'clock, and the fire in the stove was where they gathered. He would read whatever he had. He kept a small collection of books, battered and eclectic, gathered from trading and occasional purchases in town, and she would mend or write because she was writing something in a notebook she kept in her bag and he never asked what. One evening she looked up from the notebook and said, "Can I ask you something direct?" "You've never asked permission before," he said. "This is more direct than usual," she said. "Go ahead. Why didn't you ever leave? Your brother left." "You could have. The ranch is hard and the land is hard and you've been alone here for 2 years. Why stay?" He thought about it properly, not dismissively. "I stayed because of the gate," he said. She looked at him. "My father built that gate the first year," he said. "Before the house, even. He put in that gate and he said I was maybe 8 years old. He said this gate tells people they can come in if they need to." He was very serious about it. He said a ranch without a gate anyone could knock on was just a prison. He paused. "When he died, I was not ready to close that gate." Charlotte was very still. "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard about a gate," she said. "It's a very bad gate," he said. "One hinge is almost gone." "I noticed," she said. "I'll fix it." "I know you will," he said. And the way he said it, the plain certainty of it, the ease, made her look at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something close to wondering. She did fix the gate. She replaced the failing hinge on a Thursday morning and rehung the crossbar and then stood back and opened and closed it twice to test it. And when she was satisfied, she looked up at Owen, who had been watching from a distance, and gave him a single nod. He nodded back. The news from Harlan County came in the middle of November, in a letter addressed to Sheriff Meadows, and forwarded to Owen's ranch with a note from Meadows saying he thought Owen should have the full picture. The Harlan County Sheriff's investigation had found evidence consistent with a lightning strike in the hayloft. The strike point on the roof was clear, and several witnesses in the area confirmed an electrical storm on the night of October 4th. Thomas Dugan's death was ruled accidental. There was no evidence of foul play. Charlotte read the letter standing at the kitchen table, and when she finished, she set it down and pressed her hands flat on the table and stood there for a moment, breathing evenly. "It's done," Owen said. "Franklin won't accept it," she said. Franklin doesn't have to accept it. The sheriff of Harlan County has made a ruling. Franklin can be angry about it from Abilene." She looked at him. Her eyes were bright and he thought she might cry, but she didn't. She took one long, steady breath and said, "I haven't had good news in a very long time." "Well," he said, "you're due quite a lot of it." She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her expression was open in a way it had not been before, like a room that had been locked and was now only mostly closed, and he felt the pull of it like something physical. He also felt the responsibility of it. She was 2 months out of a bad marriage and freshly freed from a cloud of suspicion. She was not in a position to make clear decisions about anything, and he was not going to take advantage of the fact that she was standing in his kitchen looking at him like that. He said, "Good. Now the east pasture waterhole needs clearing before hard frost. You want to help or you want me to do it?" She blinked. She almost laughed. "I'll help," she said. They cleared the waterhole. The weeks between November and December were the building of something neither of them named. He noticed that she moved around the ranch as though it were hers, not possessively but comfortably, the way a person moves in a space they have come to inhabit rather than just occupy. She knew which board on the porch creaked. She knew which cabinet door you had to lift slightly to close properly. She knew the names he had given his cattle, which was an embarrassing fact about him that he had tried to conceal and failed, because she had heard him talking to the heifer with the eye problem. "Alice," she said one morning at breakfast without looking up from her coffee. "Pardon," he said. "You called her Alice," she said. "The heifer." "You called her Alice and you called the roan steer Gentleman Jim, and I'm fairly certain the old gray mare has a name too." He was silent. "What's the mare's name?" she asked. He looked at the ceiling. "Perseverance," he said. Charlotte put her coffee cup down very carefully and then she started laughing, and this time it was the unguarded full laugh, and he felt it go through him like a warm thing. "Perseverance," she said. "She's a very determined horse," he said with as much dignity as he could muster. "She is," Charlotte agreed, wiping her eyes. "She absolutely is." It was the first truly light morning they had shared, and something about it changed the quality of the air between them. After that she laughed more easily, and he found himself doing things more often that made her laugh. Not obviously, not clownishly, but slipping in the occasional dry observation that he knew would get her, and then looking away when it worked because he was not a man who was comfortable being seen doing something tender. December brought a cold front that was serious even by Texas standards, and they spent 3 days working hard to winterize what they could, extra bedding for the cattle, the barn gaps plugged with old cloth and packed mud, the house windows checked and the door frames caulked. It was hard physical work, and they did it together, and at the end of each day they were exhausted in the uncomplicated way of people who had spent their energy on something real. On the second evening of the cold front, with the temperature dropping hard outside and the wind finding every imperfection in the house, they ate dinner later than usual and sat by the fire afterward, and Charlotte was close to sleep in the chair across from his, and he sat watching the fire and thinking about nothing in particular, just the quality of the silence between them, which was the best kind of silence, the kind that doesn't need anything added to it. She said quietly from inside what he thought was sleep, "I think I'm happy here." He did not move. "I haven't been happy anywhere in a long time," she said. "I want to tell you that because you should know it." He said, "I'm glad." She opened her eyes and looked at him across the firelight. He said, "I'm glad, Charlotte. This ranch is better for you being here." And he stopped, started again. "It's better with you here." "That's not the same sentence you started with," she said. "No," he said. She looked at him with those measuring eyes, and whatever distance she was calculating now, he could see her arrive at an answer. She got up from her chair and she came and sat beside him on the bench in front of the fire, not too close, but near, her shoulder within reach, and she looked at the fire the way he was looking at it, and they stayed that way for a long time in the good silence, until she was asleep against his shoulder, and he sat very still so as not to wake her. December sharpened into Christmas, which in Meridian was a modest affair, a service at the small church, some exchange of goods in the general store, a dinner or two between neighbors. Owen went to town for supplies and came back with a few small things he had bought almost without thinking. A length of deep green ribbon because it was the color of her eyes in certain light, which he had not admitted to himself until he was paying for it, and a new notebook because he had seen her old one was nearly full. He put them on the kitchen table on Christmas morning without ceremony, just left them there when he went out to do morning chores, and when he came back in she was standing at the table holding the ribbon and the notebook, and her expression was something he had no word for. "Owen," she said. "It's nothing fancy," he said, pulling off his coat. "How did you know I needed a notebook? You've been rationing pages for 2 weeks." She set the notebook down and held the ribbon, and then she did something he had not expected. She crossed the kitchen and put her arms around him, briefly and firmly, the hug of someone who meant it precisely and completely. And then she stepped back, and she was not looking at him directly, and he was not looking at her directly, and they were both very interested in the mundane objects in the kitchen. "Merry Christmas," she said. "Merry Christmas," he said. He had bought himself nothing, but he had not had a Christmas that felt like this in a very long time, so it seemed to him that he had done well enough. January was cold and clear, and the ranch had 11 calves born in it, which was more than Owen had expected, and entirely due to Charlotte's attention to the pregnant cows in November, supplementing their feed and watching their condition. He had not known enough to do this consistently. She had made it a daily task without being told. He was watching her with the 5th calf one evening, a difficult birth that she managed with calm and competence, and he was thinking that he had never met anyone quite like her. He had known women who were strong. He had known women who were practical. He had known women who were funny, and women who were kind, and women who were intelligent. He had not known anyone who was all of these things and also carried themselves with the specific quality Charlotte had, which was something like, he searched for the word integrity. A seamless integrity, the kind that was not performed but was simply what you got when you looked at her from any angle. He was in serious trouble. He knew it, and he did nothing about it because the timing was not right, and he was not going to rush anything, and he had nowhere to rush to anyway. He was 31 years old on a struggling ranch in West Texas, and whatever he felt was not going anywhere, so he could afford to let it sit. On a Thursday in late January, while he was resetting a fence post and she was nearby checking the wire, she said without preamble, "I've been thinking about what comes next." He drove the post, and "I should figure out where I'm going to go," she said. "What I'm going to do. I have some money, not much, but some that I kept separately from Thomas, and I have skills now. I could find work at another ranch or in a town." "You could," he said. She was quiet. He drove another post. "Do you want to go?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. She was not looking at him. "I know what I'd be leaving. I'm not sure I know what I'd be going to." He straightened up and looked at her directly. "Charlotte," she looked at him. "I need to say something, and I need to say it plainly because I am not good at the other way," he said. "I want you to stay. Not because the ranch needs you, though it does, but because I want you here. I like your company and I trust your judgment, and I think about you more than is reasonable for a man who is supposedly just grateful for the help. I know the timing is terrible. I know you've had a hard year, and I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. But I wanted you to know it, because you deserve to make decisions with accurate information." She stared at him. He looked back at her steadily, with the careful dignity of a man who has said something true and is prepared to live with the consequences either way. "How long have you felt this?" she said. "November," he said. "Maybe October. Maybe the first morning I came out and found the fire already started." She looked at the fence wire in her hands. She set it down carefully. She turned and looked at the flat Texas horizon, the pale winter blue of it, and she was quiet for a long moment. "I have not been in a position to trust myself," she said, "about this kind of thing." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to decide anything." "But you're asking me to know," she said. "Yes," he said. "I'm asking you to know," she nodded. She picked the wire back up. She said, "Give me some time." As much as you need, he said. She gave him 2 weeks, which felt very long and was actually short. During those 2 weeks, nothing changed between them on the surface. They worked, they ate, they sat by the fire in the evenings, and the conversation was the same and the silences were the same, except they were both aware of something sitting in the air between them that had not been there before because it had not been named, and now that it was named it was present. He did not press her. He said nothing more about it. He went about his business and gave her the time he had promised, and he was very careful not to look at her in a way that might feel like pressure. On a Tuesday evening in early February, she came in from evening chores and he was making dinner for once, a stew that was simple and probably not as good as what she would have made, and she came and stood on the other side of the table and said, "I've been thinking." He stirred the stew. "I assumed. I am not ready to be anyone's wife," she said. "I want to say that clearly. It's too soon and I have things to sort through, and I need to not be in a position where someone else has legal authority over my life again. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. I didn't ask you to be anyone's wife," he said. "I know you didn't. I'm saying it anyway so it's clear." "Understood," he said, but she said. He set the spoon down. "I want to know you better," she said. "I want to try, whatever this is, carefully, at a pace that I'm in charge of." He looked at her across the table. "Then that's what we'll do," he said. "And if it becomes something more eventually, we'll talk about it then." "Yes," he said. "And if I change my mind at any point, then you change your mind," he said. "You're not obligated to me for anything, Charlotte. That's not what this is." She looked at him for a long time, reading him, measuring that distance. "All right," she said. "Then I'm staying." And she came around the table and she stood beside him and she kissed him once very briefly on the corner of his jaw, and then she took the spoon out of his hand and said, "Let me do this before you ruin it." And he let her, and he was smiling, really smiling, in a way that used his whole face in a way he had apparently forgotten how to do. February melted slowly into March, and the land started waking up the way Texas land does. Tentatively, the first green threads appearing in the dead grass, the temperature swinging wildly between warm afternoons and cold nights. The ranch was different now, not just better maintained, though it was that, but different in character. There were two people's traces on it, her herb bundles drying in the kitchen, his books stacked on the shelf she had built for them from spare lumber. The names he had given the cattle written in her handwriting on a chalkboard by the barn door, because she had said it was easier for keeping track of their health history. And she was right about that. But she had also written them in careful letters with a small, careful drawing next to each name. Alice the heifer with a small cow drawn beside her. And he had stood in front of that chalkboard for a longer time than was dignified. They were walking together one afternoon in early March along the creek line, checking the bank for erosion after a wet week, when she said, "I want to tell you something I haven't told anyone." He walked beside her and said, "All right." "When I was writing in my notebook," she said, "I was writing about the ranch, about what it needed, what could be done with it." She paused. "I was drawing up a plan." "What kind of plan?" "An expansion plan," she said. "Slow and careful. You have good land, Owen. You have more good land than you have cattle for. If you could get a second herd, a smaller starter herd, something manageable, and expand the rotation, in 3 years this place could be running at half again what it is now." He stopped walking. "Show me," he said. She showed him. That evening she spread the notebook on the kitchen table, which he now saw was full not of personal thoughts but of densely written pages of calculations and observations, pasture maps drawn from memory, rainfall estimates, cattle counts, projected expenses. It was the most thorough business document he had ever seen, and it had been produced by a woman who had been here less than 5 months. He sat looking at it for a long time. "Charlotte," he said. "I know it's presumptuous," she said quickly. "It's your ranch, I just know," he said. "It's not that." He looked up at her. "How did you learn to do this?" She blinked. "What, this? The planning, the numbers, the management, how?" She was quiet for a moment. "I taught myself," she said. "There was a book. Thomas had a ranching almanac from the 1870s. He never used it. I read it 3 times. And then I watched what worked and what didn't, and I applied what I knew from Kansas, and I wrote things down. She looked at the notebook. On Thomas's ranch, it didn't matter what I knew because he wouldn't listen, so I just kept writing it down anyway. And you brought it here, he said. I brought it here, she said. He looked at the plan in front of him. He thought about all the things that had been growing quietly in him for the past 5 months, the respect and the wanting and the specific joy of her company. And he thought that whatever was happening between them was not one thing but many things layered together, and that all of those layers were sound. He said, I want to do this, the expansion, with you, as partners. She looked at him, and this time there was no measuring in it. She just looked at him with something open and warm. Okay, she said. Full partners, he said, half and half. The ranch is yours as much as it's mine. Owen. I mean it legally, he said. We'll make it formal. I'll talk to the land office. I won't have you here working on something and having nothing to show for it if something happens to me. She looked at her hands on the table. She said quietly, You understand that matters. That means more than you know. I know it does, he said. That's why I'm saying it. She looked up at him and her eyes were bright, and she said, Thank you, Owen, for all of it, for the gate and the water and the fence and all of it. You're the one who fixed the gate, he pointed out. She laughed and he laughed, and the sound of it filled the kitchen and went out through the walls into the clean March night. Spring came in earnest, and the ranch began to run as Charlotte's plan described. Owen went to the land office in March and had the deed updated to include her name, which the clerk regarded with a faintly puzzled expression that Owen did not explain, and Charlotte, who came with him, did not apologize for. She had her name on something now. On land. Charlotte Dugan, co-owner, right there in the official record. She stood on the boardwalk outside the land office afterward and breathed the spring air, and Owen stood beside her and did not hurry her. Is this the first time? He asked. First time my name was on land, she said. Yes, he nodded. He knew better than to say something that would diminish it with too much sentiment. But he took her hand briefly, there on the boardwalk in Meridian on a spring morning. Her hand was warm and calloused and familiar, and she curled her fingers around his, and they stood there for a moment looking at the ordinary street, the ordinary day, and it was not ordinary at all. In April, they bought 6 head from a rancher 3 counties south, who was liquidating part of his herd, good cattle, young and healthy, at a fair price negotiated by Charlotte, who turned out to be a formidable bargainer, a fact that caused the selling rancher considerable confusion and Owen considerable quiet delight. The new cattle settled into the rotation. The expanded pasture plan worked the way the notebook had said it would. The grass recovered where they had given it breathing room, and the herd began to build the visible health that comes from proper management. Owen also, in the course of this spring, fixed the porch step that had been missing for a year. He built a new one from good lumber and set it solid and level, and Charlotte came out to test it by stepping on it several times with increasing firmness, and declared it sound, and then looked at him with such warmth that he had to look away for a moment. The summer was good. It was the specific goodness of 2 people who have found each other in an improbable place and are discovering all the ways they fit, the small daily ways and the larger quiet ways. He was not a man who needed noise, and she was not a woman who made unnecessary noise, and they worked in an easy, companionable rhythm that the ranch and the cattle seemed to feel, because it was a calmer, more purposeful operation than it had been. She was writing less in the notebook, which was now her second notebook, the one he had given her for Christmas. She told him one morning that she had started writing other things, not plans, but she searched for a word, observations, things she noticed. He did not ask more than that, but he understood that she was putting down roots in a way that was not just practical, and that the roots were going down through the ranch and through him, and through the specific quality of the life they were building. He was falling more deeply in love with her every week. He knew it precisely now. It was not the frantic, breathless kind of love he had read about in the old novels his mother had kept on the shelf. It was the other kind, the kind that is warm and specific, that knows its object clearly and wants exactly that thing and no idealized version of it. He wanted Charlotte Dugan, who was practical and funny and fierce and a little guarded still in certain places, who could string fence wire and deliver calves and negotiate a cattle price, and also sat in the firelight in the evenings with her notebook, and hummed very softly when she was absorbed in something, and did not know she was doing it. He wanted exactly her. On a July evening, warm and still with the sound of crickets coming in through the open window, they were sitting on the porch with the new step, the fixed gate visible in the early dark, and he said her name. She turned and looked at him. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to know that whatever you answer, nothing changes between us. The ranch is still yours and I am still your whatever I am to you, but I need to ask." She was very still and very attentive. "I want to marry you," he said. "When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I want that to be where we're going." She looked at him for a long time. He waited. "Not yet," she said, "but yes." He breathed. "Not yet," she said again, "because I meant what I said in February. I need more time. A year maybe less, but the answer to whether the answer is yes, Owen." He took her hand. "Then I'll wait," he said. "You've been very good at waiting," she said. "I'm motivated," he said. She laughed and leaned her head against his shoulder, and he put his arm around her, and the summer night settled around them, warm and complete. In August, a man came to the ranch. He rode up on a dark horse in the late afternoon, a well-dressed man in his mid-30s with the hard eyes of someone accustomed to getting what he came for. Owen was in the yard and Charlotte was at the pump, and she saw the man and went very still. Franklin Dugan was not physically imposing. He was not tall. But he had the kind of presence that money and a willingness to use it will give a man. And he looked at the Barlow ranch with the assessment of someone calculating what trouble it was worth. Owen stepped between him and the gate. "Mr. Dugan," Owen said because he had guessed. "Barlow," Franklin said. He had done his research too. "My sister-in-law is not here to be intimidated," Owen said. "The Harlan County investigation closed this case in November. Sheriff Meadows has a copy of the findings. If you have new evidence, you take it to the sheriff. You don't bring it to my gate." Franklin looked past him at Charlotte, who had come to stand a few feet behind Owen. She was not hiding. She met Franklin's gaze directly. "You have a nerve," Franklin said to her. "I have a legal standing," she said. "Which is different." Franklin looked at the ranch. He looked at the fence line and the barn and the name on the land deed that he could not possibly know but seemed to sense the existence of. He looked at Owen, who was standing in front of his gate the way his father had stood in front of it, with the particular immovability of a man who has decided something once and does not need to decide it again. "This isn't over," Franklin said. "Yes, it is," Charlotte said. "Your brother is dead and the land is gone and the investigation is closed. I have nothing you want and nothing you can take. It's over, Franklin." He looked at her for a long moment with something ugly in his face, and then he looked at Owen, and whatever he saw there made him calculate something. He turned his horse and rode back down the road. Charlotte stood watching until he was out of sight. Then she let out a long, slow breath. Owen turned and faced her. "All right," he said. "Yes," she said. She looked at him. "He won't come back." "No," Owen agreed. She put her hand on his arm briefly, just the pressure of it, and then she looked at the road one more time, and then she looked at the ranch, the repaired fence, the solid gate, the barn with its new roof, the house with its new porch step, and she looked at Owen and she said, "This is mine." "Yes," he said. "And I will not lose it," she said. "Not a chance," he said. And that was the last they spoke of Franklin Dugan. The autumn came and the cattle were in good condition going into it. Owen counted 15 calves since spring and all of them healthy. And the pasture rotation was producing the grass recovery the notebook had predicted. There was money in the account at the Meridian Bank that had not been there a year ago. Not a fortune, but a margin, a buffer, the specific comfort of knowing that one bad month would not ruin everything. He had also, in September, built Charlotte a proper workroom. Not the sewing room she had started in, which was small and dark and had a sagging cot in it. He had used the good lumber left from the barn project and added a room to the back of the house, with a proper window facing east to catch the morning light, and a desk he had ordered from the general store, and shelves he built himself to her specifications. When he showed it to her finished, she stood in the doorway for a long time and then came in and ran her hand along the desk surface and the shelf edge and the window frame. "Owen Barlow," she said. "It needed doing," he said. "You built me a room," she said. "You built me a ranch," he said. "Seemed fair." She turned from the window and crossed the room and kissed him, properly this time, the way they had been kissing since June, but with something more in it, something that was not tentative at all, and he held her carefully and kissed her back the same way. When she stepped back, she was smiling with her whole face and her eyes were bright, and she said, "How long have you been planning this room?" "March," he said. She laughed. "March. I wanted to get the lumber right," he said. "Owen." "What?" "Marry me," she said. "I'm ready." He looked at her. "I know I said maybe a year," she said. "It's been almost a year, close enough. I'm ready, and I want to do it while the weather is good, and I want Sheriff Meadows to witness it because he was fair to me when he didn't have to be." He was grinning now, the full, unguarded grin of a man who has been given exactly what he wanted precisely when he stopped expecting it. "All right," he said. "All right." She said, "All right, Charlotte, let's get married." They were married on a Saturday in the second week of October, almost exactly a year after she had walked through the gate wearing ash and carrying a name he didn't recognize. The ceremony was at the small church in Meridian, which the minister, a young man named Reverend Ashby who was earnest and sincere, decorated with whatever was still blooming in October, which turned out to be yellow flowers and dried grasses, and it was exactly right, exactly the right kind of spare and honest beauty for the two of them. Sheriff Meadows was there as Charlotte had requested, standing in the second row with his hat in his hands, looking like a man who was pleased to be present at a thing that had turned out well. Old Pete Cassidy from the feed store was there because Owen had known him his whole life. The woman who ran the boarding house was there because she had been kind to Charlotte once in passing, and Charlotte had not forgotten it. There were not many people, but the right ones were present. Charlotte wore the blue dress she had bought in Meridian in the spring, the actual blue this time, not the burned gray. She had done her hair with the green ribbon from Christmas, and she looked. Owen saw her coming up the short aisle, and the word that came to him was not a word he would have said aloud, but it was true. She looked like someone who had decided to be happy and was doing it completely. He stood at the front of the church in his best coat, which was not very fine but was clean and pressed, and when she reached him she took both his hands and looked up at him with those dark, careful eyes, and he thought, "There she is. There is the woman who walked through my gate and fixed it after I opened it." Reverend Ashby said the words. They said their own words, because Charlotte had asked to say her own, and Owen had written his down the night before and read them from a folded piece of paper with the focused care of a man who does not trust himself to remember the exact right thing when it matters. He said, "You came here a year ago with nothing your name was on, and you built something that your name is on now, and you built it alongside me, and there is nothing in my life that I am more grateful for than the fact that I opened that gate. I will spend whatever time I have trying to deserve your trust, and I will always open the gate." She pressed his hands and her eyes were bright, and she said, "I came here not knowing if I could trust the ground I was walking on. You gave me ground that held. I will build things on it for as long as I'm able, and I will be here, Owen, I will be here." Meadows made a sound in the second row that was possibly the sheriff clearing his throat and possibly something else. They were married. The reception, if you could call it that, was at the ranch. Charlotte had cooked for 2 days in advance, and there was food enough for everyone who came, which was the Meridian people and 2 neighboring ranchers who had heard the news and come by out of goodwill, including, somewhat surprisingly, the eldest Hessler's son, who arrived alone and shook Owen's hand and told Charlotte with frank directness that he was sorry his family had not been more neighborly. Charlotte received this with the same plain steadiness she received everything and said, "Neighbors now then," and offered him food. He ate 2 plates and left looking like a man who had done something right. The evening of the wedding was quiet after the guests had gone, and Charlotte and Owen sat on the porch in the October air, the same way they had been sitting for almost a year, except now different in all the ways that mattered. The stars were enormous and low over the flat land, and the sound of the cattle in the pasture was a kind of steady presence, the proof of everything they had built. She leaned against his shoulder and he had his arm around her and they looked at the sky. "We should write to your brother," she said. He was quiet. "Wherever he is," she said, "he should know." Owen had not thought about writing to Clem in a long time because Clem had not written to him and the silence between them had grown a kind of permanence. But Charlotte was right, the way she was right about most things. "Okay," he said. "He might come back," she said. "He might," Owen said. "If he does, there's room." She looked up at him. "There's room. This ranch is bigger than it was," he said. "And I have a partner now. I can afford to be generous." She smiled and settled back against him, and the night was very quiet and very good. They wrote to Clem a week later, or rather Charlotte wrote it, at Owen's direction, because her handwriting was considerably better than his. She wrote that Owen was married to a woman named Charlotte, and that the ranch was running well, and that they would be glad of a visit if he ever found himself heading back east. Clem wrote back in December, 3 pages from somewhere in Colorado territory, rambling and warm and astonished, and he said he had been thinking about home more and more, and that he was very glad Owen had found someone. He came to visit in the spring of 1884 and stayed a month and left with an expression of barely concealed envy at what the Barlow ranch had become, and he promised to write regularly, and he did. In the fall of 1883, Charlotte found herself certain of something she had suspected since August, and she told Owen on a Sunday morning while he was still drinking his first coffee. He stared at her. She stared back. He put the coffee cup down very carefully and he stood up and he crossed the kitchen and put his arms around her and held her, just held her for a long time, and she felt him breathe and felt the specific quality of the feeling he was not saying out loud, which was enormous and which she felt too. "Are you all right?" he said into her hair. "I'm very well," she said. "Are you happy about it?" "Yes," she said. "I was afraid I might not be, but I am." He pulled back and looked at her face and she looked at his, and there was something in his expression that she thought she would put in the notebook later, that quality of a man looking at everything he wanted and knowing it was real. "We'll need to add on to the house," she said. "I know," he said, "and the workroom will become the nursery." "I'll build you a better workroom," he said. "You'll build me a better workroom," she agreed. He built it that winter and it was better. Their son was born in April of 1884, early spring, when the land was just beginning to come back and the calves were appearing in the pasture, and the whole ranch had the quality of things arriving. He was born in the bedroom of the house that Charlotte and Owen had expanded twice in the past year, and he was healthy from the start, loud and certain of his opinions, which Charlotte said came from Owen's side and Owen said came from hers. They named him James Hiram Barlow, James for no particular reason except that it was a solid name, and Hiram for Owen's father, who had built the gate. James Hiram grew fast and with enormous curiosity about everything on the ranch, which his parents indulged with the specific joy of people who have worked hard for the life they are raising him in. He learned the names of the cattle before he could reliably say them, producing variants of Alice and Perseverance that made his parents laugh helplessly. He sat in the saddle in front of his father at an age that was probably too young and showed no fear at all, which Charlotte viewed with the wary satisfaction of someone who knows exactly who he has gotten that from. The ranch expanded again, slowly and according to plan, the plan in the notebooks that filled a shelf in Charlotte's rebuilt workroom. By 1886, the Barlow operation was not the worst ranch in 3 counties. It was not the best either, but it was solid, working, solvent, growing, staffed now by 2 part-time hands Owen had hired with the confidence of being able to actually pay them. One of the hands, a young man named Roque who had come up from South Texas, had a skill with horses that was remarkable, and Charlotte spent 3 months teaching him the pasture rotation system because he was quick and she liked teaching, a fact about herself she was still discovering. Roke stayed for 3 years, learned everything she could show him, and left for his own land with her blessing and a very detailed notebook. In 1886, Charlotte was certain again, earlier this time because she knew what to look for. She told Owen in the kitchen on a Thursday morning, and he sat down in his chair with an expression of pure, unguarded delight that she had grown to love as one of the finest things in her daily life. "Again," he said. "Again," she confirmed. "James will be a good older brother," Owen said. "James will boss the younger one mercilessly," Charlotte said, "and they will be inseparable anyway." She was right on both counts. Their second child arrived in the spring of 1887, a boy again, smaller and quieter than James but with eyes that were entirely his mother's, that specific dark measuring quality, and Owen held him on the first morning and looked into those careful eyes and said, "He's going to see right through everything." "Good," Charlotte said from the bed. "The world needs more of that." They named him Peter Owen Barlow, Peter for no particular reason and Owen for his father. The 3 years that followed were the years of full life, the density of it, 2 boys growing, the ranch running, Owen and Charlotte working in the easy integrated way of 2 people who have become each other's reference point. There were hard seasons. A drought year in 1888 that required all of Charlotte's planning skill to navigate without devastating the herd. A winter illness that went through the house and kept Charlotte in bed for a week and Owen awake for most of it with the particular fear of someone who has learned what loss feels like and does not want to learn it more. She recovered fully and came back to the kitchen table and her notebooks and said, "I've been thinking about the East Waterhole situation," and Owen had felt such relief at the normalcy of it that he had sat down and laughed. She looked at him. "What?" "Nothing," he said. Just you." She looked at him with those careful eyes, and then she smiled the full smile and came around the table and sat beside him and said, "I'm not going anywhere." "I know," he said. "I mean it," she said. "I know you mean it," he said. And she took his hand and they sat there in the kitchen, in the house that had been expanded twice and fixed in countless places, and was theirs in every sense. And the boys were outside, and the cattle were in the pasture, and the gate was solid on its fixed hinges. And outside the light was the warm, late afternoon amber of the Texas October, exactly the color it had been the morning she walked out of the flat land and asked him for water. He had given her water and she had given him everything else. In the autumn of 1890, when James was 6 and Peter was 3, and the ranch was running with more confidence than it had in all the years before Charlotte arrived, they sat one evening on the porch with the boys already asleep inside and the stars doing what they always did over the flat Texas land. She had the new notebook, her fourth, he thought, open on her lap, but she wasn't writing. She was looking at the gate. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm thinking about the day I walked through it. I was so tired. I was so certain that I had run out of good things." She paused. "And then you opened it and said, 'You need water.'" "You need water," he repeated. "Very romantic," she laughed softly. "It was exactly right," she said. "It was the exactly right thing." She looked at him. "You didn't ask me anything except the one practical question. You didn't ask where I was from or who I was or what had happened. Just, do you need water? Yes or no?" "You needed water," he said. "I needed a great deal more than water," she said. "But that was the place to start." He looked at the gate in the dark, the gate with the solid hinges and the straight crossbar, the gate that had been his father's first act on this land. "My father was right," he said, "about what a gate is for." "He was," she said. They were quiet together for a while, the good quiet. Then James appeared at the door in his nightshirt, 6 years old and unimpressed by bedtime, saying he had heard something in the pasture and it might be a coyote and he needed to investigate. And the peaceful philosophical moment dissolved into the brisk comedy of explaining to a 6-year-old that no, he was not going to investigate anything tonight. And yes, Perseverance could handle herself and please go back to bed. Charlotte got up and took him back inside, talking to him in the low, patient voice she used with the boys, the voice that was somehow both firm and warm at once, the voice that was entirely hers. Owen sat on the porch in the autumn dark and listened to her talking to James through the wall, and he heard the boy's voice wind down from argumentative to drowsy to nothing. And then Charlotte came back out and sat down beside him and said, "He's going to be trouble." "He's already trouble," Owen said. "Lovable trouble," she allowed. He put his arm around her and she leaned into him and they sat looking at the gate. 8 years since she had come through it. 8 years since the worst ranch in 3 counties had opened its broken hinges to a woman in ash, with a name nobody in this county recognized. 8 years of fences fixed and calves born and plans written out in careful handwriting and mornings with the fire already started and evenings with the sound of someone else's breathing in a house that had been too quiet. He had opened the gate because his father had told him gates were for opening. He had not known then what would walk through it. He knew now. He pulled her a little closer, and she made a small sound of contentment, and the Texas night was wide and still and full of stars. And inside the house his boys slept in their beds, and in the pasture the cattle stood in the grass that had grown back patient and deep from years of good management, and the gate stood straight and solid on its hinges. Charlotte Dugan had arrived at the worst ranch in 3 counties wearing ash and carrying a name nobody recognized. Owen Barlow had opened the gate. Everything that followed, the water, the cornbread, the fence line, the calf named Alice, the Christmas notebook, the green ribbon, the land deed with 2 names on it, the rooms built and rebuilt, the plan that filled 4 notebooks, the boys with their particular eyes, the evenings on the porch, the mornings with the fire already started. All of it was the shape of what happened when a gate was opened. It was the shape of a life, built by 2 people who had each needed exactly what the other had to give, and who had been practical enough to admit it, and brave enough to tend it, and wise enough to know that what grew between them was not something that had happened to them, but something they had chosen, day after day, in the ordinary and extraordinary ongoing work of it. The stars were very bright. The gate was very solid. And inside the house on the Barlow Ranch, in the family that had been built there, all was well.